Okay, hi everybody, and again, although it is still possible that Tisha B'Av will be canceled as a fast day this year, we really literally hope and pray for the Binyan Beis HaMikdash and the Geula, even at this late date, but the probabilities are such that we probably will be fasting Saturday night and Sunday, but Be'ezrat Hashem, it should be the last time that Tisha B'Av will be a day of fasting and a day of suffering and a day of sorrow. It's been almost 2,000 years. The second temple was destroyed in the year 70, and we are still grieving, we are still mourning, and we turn to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and we ask, Ad Masai, how long is it going to be? Let me just remind you of the very important statement of the Gemara. It's a statement that all of you know, and that is that the first Beis HaMikdash was destroyed because of the cardinal sins of Avodah Zarah, Gilui Arayos, sexual immorality, Shvichus Damim, murder. We talked about that last week. And that galut only lasted 70 years. 70 years later, a second temple was built, and many Jews did return to Eretz Yisrael. Most of the Jews did not, but that was their choice. They could have returned. They decided not to. So for the worst averos of the Torah, the galut was only 70 years. Now the second Beis HaMikdash, the Jews were largely halachically observant. There were sectarian movements, etc., but by and large people were keeping mitzvos. They were even learning Torah. So why was the second temple destroyed? So the Gemara in Yuma says, because of the sinat chinam, because of the hatred, polarization, dissension that existed among Jews. And the Gemara comments, Bo Ura'eh, come and see, for Avodah Zarah, Gilui Arayos, Shvichus Damim, 70 years, and that's it. For Sinat Chinam, we are still in Golus to this very day. Now the Gemara said that 1,500 years ago, add on another 1,500 years. And that shows you how devastating Sinat Chinam is. And obviously, therefore, if this is the time of year where we concentrate on trying to rebuild the Beis HaMikdash, then one of the most important things we can do is to try to bridge the gap that exists between Jews. I talk about this a lot, and I feel like Mark Twain sometimes. Everybody talks about the weather, and nobody ever does anything about it. And in truth, on a national scale, we as small individuals can't really change the world or change Israel or change the Jewish people, but we could try to change and improve in our own individual lives, how we connect to people and care about people. And if enough of us do that, then there is indeed a critical mass.
There's always a reason why somebody hates another person.
Yes. So that's a very important question. What is sinas chinam? Irrational hatred. I believe that every person in the world will condemn irrational hatred. In other words, if I hate somebody, and someone asks me, why do you hate them? I'm not going to say, no reason, I just hate them. I'm always going to have a reason, right? Am I against hating people for no reason? Of course, but I have reasons. Now, if Chazal calls something sinat chinam, apparently that means even if you think you have reasons, they're no good. And here is the critical point that we have to remember, and again, this comes up again and again in every parsha of the Torah. It comes up in one form or another. And that is, obviously, we can debate, and even very vigorously, in the realm of ideas. There are machloksim in halacha, there are machloksim in hashkafa. Those are legitimate. We're not supposed to suppress a view that we feel is emes, that we feel brings people to God. Whether it's the issue of how do you view the state of Israel, what is the role of the army vis-a-vis yeshiva students, secular education. These are issues that can be debated. And there are multiple sides to this. But that is not the same as demonizing people. That is not the same as looking at them as a Amalek. Somebody could be wrong, and somebody could even be foolish. And they're not necessarily apikorsim, they're not heretics. They're not apostates. They're not Amalek. Moreover, it's very, very important to understand that even in ideas that you reject, and maybe rightfully so, there are often kernels of truth that can be extracted and that can create the basis for a common ground. So people might say something that's totally against what I believe, but there will usually be something there that I could take. And the truth of the matter is, the way we create relationships is by acknowledging the truth or a truth within the other person's position that makes them much more open. I remember I once had I think I may have told you this story before, so forgive me if I'm repeating myself. As I get older, all of us go through this process. I was once a last-minute substitute for a debate with Alan Dershowitz about something. Nathan Lewin, the famous Alan Dershowitz. I mean, I knew Alan Dershowitz from the time I was a law student, and actually my very first day in law school, back in 1976, a long time ago. So I had to keep on, and it was like orientation, student orientation. So Alan Dershowitz, who was not religious at that time, although he came from a religious family, went over to me, and he said, I see that you're an Orthodox Jewish student. He says, I used to be that, he said, and I'm connected to that world too. And he said, if there's anything I could ever help you with, I'd be happy to help you with if you have any Jewish religious problems. So he was actually a very, very nice person. But he didn't remember me. This was then 25 years later. So Nathan Lewin, who is from Washington attorney, a very, very well-known constitutional attorney, was supposed to debate Dershowitz about menorahs. Lewin was the attorney for Chabad in all these cases, menorahs in public places, and Dershowitz argued the First Amendment, freedom of separation of church and state, you can't have it. And Lewin was the one who defended all of that, etc. So they were supposed to debate. It would have been a good debate. They're both very, very good debaters. Nathan Lewin didn't show up. Whatever, he couldn't show up. Last minute he had to cancel. So I was drafted. I happened to have been at the event, so I was drafted as a last minute substitute. Now, Dershowitz didn't know who I was, although I myself was a professor of law, but much, much lower class. So Dershowitz was so offended, really, that here he was going to debate with a world famous constitutional attorney, and instead he has to talk to, he has to debate with some schnook that he's never heard of. He didn't remember our encounter weeks later, and he was like very offended, and I started off with telling that story of how he helped me 25 years before, and all of a sudden, his arms were like this. All of a sudden he started relaxing, smiling, and then, whatever, and it turned out to be a very, very nice discussion, because what I did, and again, I'm not giving myself credit for it, what I did was kind of, instead of debating by saying, you're totally wrong, I kind of acknowledged the good that he's done for me, and the good that he's done as an advocate for Israel, various other things as well. And, he felt acknowledged, he felt appreciated, he felt validated, and that made him more receptive to even address, whatever arguments I brought up. Now, that is Shlomo HaMelech's yesod that I've said probably 100 times. Shlomo HaMelech says, Kamayim apanim el panim. Water reflects the face that you show it, so too a human heart reflects that what you show it. I show a person respect, they will respect me. I show a person denigration, they will disrespect me. That is why in Eretz Yisrael, the polarization is unending, because we're locked into a vicious cycle, whether it's in the politics, liberal, conservative, or whether it's religious, secular, whether it's the machloksim within religious, because each side looks at the other side as having no redeemable value in anything that they say. So I look at someone else and I say, you mean nothing, you have nothing, there is not a single valid idea that you offer. Well, how are they going to view me? They're going to view me the same way. If, on the other hand, we are mechapes, nikudot of emet that can be even in critiques of whatever our position is, that opens a person up. I'm sorry, did you want to say, Nina, you wanted to say something? Yeah, you had your hand up. Yeah.
Is there any valid hatred?
So I would say this, that is a very good question. David HaMelech says in Tehillim, that those who hate you, God, I hate. But the Baal Tanya writes, and it's a difficult idea to actualize, that there is a hatred of the evil that people may represent, but at the same time you also acknowledge the essential godliness of their soul. And therefore, even when you hate, there can actually exist a love and a compassion if people are misguided and the like. Now, if you want to test that with extreme cases, do you hate Hitler? I understand that there are going to be cases that are so extreme that it might be difficult to come up with that ethic. And again, let me point out that love does not mean turn the other cheek. And that's another point. In other words, I can love a person and say they have to die, nevertheless, for whatever it is. In other words, how you relate to enemies that try to destroy you is really a separate question. It's not the same idea of Christian love, of total forgiveness. But nevertheless, on some level, you love the divine potential within a human being that could have been good. And if it was not good, that is a great tragedy. That is why Golda Meir's infamous remark, where she said, we can forgive the Arabs for killing our children. Again, I disassociate myself from that. But then the second remark, we cannot forgive them for making us kill their children. That second part, not the first part, let's say, but the second part has a certain resonance, because yes, we will kill the people that try to kill us. We will do that. And that's proper, and that's legitimate, and that's a mitzvah. But that doesn't mean we're happy that we're doing it. And that's the difference between a Jew and maybe the other side of this. And that is, there is no joy in what you have to do, even when you have to do it. So even when it's a cause that you hate, and even when it's behavior that you hate, and even when it's behavior that you have to destroy, there is still a sense of love for the essence of the person that could have been good, because it's an essence of God. That the soul of a human being, of every human being, is an essence of God. So this is what Sinat Chinam is about. That we just, I don't, when I say we, I don't mean anyone here individually, but the Jewish people in so many segments, we just fail to realize that the whole world is really against us in many ways. It's reminiscent of the New Yorker cartoon where you have a patient in a psychiatrist's office, and he's on a couch, and the psychiatrist says, I have good news for you. You're not paranoid. Everybody does hate you. And the Jewish people are kind of in the same boat. We're not paranoid, really. The truth of the matter is, either everybody hates us or everybody's on the verge of hating us, if at any particular point their interests diverge from our interests. So we have a whole world that's against us. The proverbial 70 wolves, and we are the sheep among 70 wolves. So at least we need to stick together. We need to be together. We have a small country, a beautiful country, Baruch Hashem, but a small country, a small population throughout the world, a population that there are large numbers that would be very happy to destroy and decimate. So at a minimum, we need to be together. This is the idea of Sinat Chinam, and as you pointed out, obviously everybody has reasons, otherwise they wouldn't hate. But the reasons apparently are called Chinam, even if you have reasons. And let me point out too that Sinat Chinam can exist in multiple forms. It could be hot, it could be cold. There's the hot Sinat Chinam, throwing rocks, denigrating, blocking traffic. But there's a cold Sinat Chinam, which is indifference, not caring. You're not part of my clique. You're not part of my group. Therefore, you don't really count. Now, that's not active hostility, so to speak. But in my heart, when I just don't care. In fact, Elie Wiesel wrote very famously.
Question.
Yeah.
What's our attitude, not towards ideological differences, for which your point is so well taken, but person behavior? How are we supposed to feel about that man in Ramlet last week who murdered a fellow Jew, the father of a family, in a dispute over a parking space?
Yeah.
And aren't we entitled to hate him?
So again, I go back to the somewhat complicated idea of the Balatanya, that there is simultaneously hate and love. at the same time. I think I had mentioned previously a meditation from Rav Moshe Cordovero, was one of the great Mekubalim, where he says, when you're confronted with difficult people, evil people even, you try to turn back the clock mentally to some point in time when they must have been okay. Maybe that means when they were a 6-month-old baby. A cute baby, an adorable baby. And then you ask yourself, what happened to take that beautiful child and make him into such a bad person? And then Rav Moshe Cordovero says, instead of hatred, what you feel is sorrow. Sorrow that a human being could take the beautiful potential of life and turn it into something ugly. And now again, I want to point out that this is not what's called bleeding heart liberalism. I mean, by all means, as I say, we will kill the terrorists, we will, imprison or punish the murderers. Nobody is talking about letting things slide. That's not the point. But on a deeper emotional level, it's not hate that is the operative concept here. It's taking care of the problem that you need to take care of, and then understand that human beings get broken. And we have to figure out in our lives.
Pity the person and the sick person rather than an evil person.
It is a form of sickness. Now it's a tricky paradigm, because on one hand we believe in free will. In other words, we don't chalk everything, he must have been sick, right? The mass murderer must have been sick. There is free will involved, and for that free will, a person is morally accountable by God and punishable by human institutions as well. But at the same time, side by side with free will, there is a concept of sickness. Chazal actually say this lashon: nobody commits a sin unless a spirit of insanity has seized them. Now, that doesn't mean I can claim I'm a shota, therefore I'm putter from a punishment. But there is a point at which something got distorted, something got bent, something got twisted. And that leads a person into very, very devastating paths. So it's a tricky thing. Rav Kook writes very beautifully. Rav Kook, of course, was the great paradigm in his own life of Ahavas Yisrael, of all sorts, even people that were very, very different than his hashkafa. And by the way, his love was on both sides. Rav Kook, people always talk about his love for the secular Jew, the irreligious Jew, the hostile Jew. But Rav Kook had tremendous love for the, let's say, more religious Jews who condemned him and insulted him and were mavaza him. And he still said he was grateful to them because they kept him in line. He acknowledged, he says, I'm grateful for the criticism, because since I am going into uncharted waters, I need someone to pull me back from the precipice. So Rav Kook was a lover of Ahavas Yisrael on both sides of the equation. Rav Kook writes, and I can't give you the exact words, it's quite a beautiful quote. He says, it is the way of a wise person to generate light and not to attack darkness, to validate and to build up that which is good, and not to spend a lot of time in hating. Meaning to say, hatred is natural in many cases, and it may even be justified, but in many ways it's inherently a destructive type of emotion. It keeps us in an angry modality. It fills our mind with desires for revenge. So in a sense, it's not a positive emotion for spiritual growth, even when it is directed against targets who perhaps might deserve it. So one concentrates, so to speak, on loving that which is good and that which is noble, instead of hating even that which is bad. You kind of don't get so involved in it.
Somebody who's a Jew who converts and becomes a missionary.
Yeah.
Or somebody who joins BDS, a Jewish person joins BDS, and is constantly lobbying against Israel and defending it. You say even those people...
Well, once again, they're broken. They got broken inside. I mean, I saw a YouTube video of the Rebbe. There's a lot of stuff with the Lubavitcher Rebbe on YouTube. In fact, I've seen much more of the Rebbe now than I saw when he was alive. And there was a guy, I mean, everybody, it's amazing. I mean, the woman who won the Miss Israel beauty contest goes to whatever it is, and he manages, she says, I'm a beauty contestant. He manages to say something nice to her there too. So this guy shows up, and this guy says he wants to give the Rebbe a pamphlet about Jews for Jesus, about why Jesus. He says, I converted to Christianity, 25 years ago, and I wanted to give the Rebbe, but I'm a Jew, I'm a proud Jew, and I wanted to give the Rebbe my writings on the subject. So the Rebbe says, the Rebbe is very nice to him, but he says, when a man is sick, the greatest sickness is he doesn't realize that he's sick. He thinks he's well. The man says, I'm well, I'm perfectly happy. He says, that's a sign of the greatest sickness. And my prayer for you is that you come back to your people and come back to your Torah, come back to your God. So he gives the Rebbe the book. And the Rebbe says, yes, there's a lot of people watching. The Rebbe says, I'm taking this book from you, so that will give you one less chance to give the book to somebody else. So he takes the book. Then as the guy walks by, you see the Rebbe throws it into the garbage pail. But that's what the Rebbe says to the Rebbe. Says to the person, you're very, very sick. And I hope that God will give you a refuah shalema, he says, So it's a tricky thing. I mean, we do hate the evil, but at the same time, when we're consumed with it, it's ultimately a destructive emotion. This is the idea of the sinat chinam. To give you maybe a more moderate example, many years ago, I was giving a shir in Columbia, Maryland, and there was it was a totally non-religious group of people. And a woman went over to me after the shir, and she asked me a question, and she began the question by saying, I'm not as religious as you, but, I don't even remember what the question was. But she prefaced it, I'm not as religious as you. So I said to her, how do you know you're not as religious as I am? Maybe you're more religious than I. Maybe I know more about Shabbos, and maybe I know more about kosher, but maybe you honor your parents better than I do. Maybe you're a more generous person. Maybe you're a kinder person. That's also in the Torah, right? So even to divide the world into religious and non-religious in many ways is an artificial division. Because the Torah has many, many mitzvahs, and none of us are keeping all of them. So I keep some, and somebody else may do other things. In fact, that's one of Chabad's selling points. Chabad likes to, when they want to help people make their kitchen kosher, they say, you're already 85% kosher. Look, the banana's kosher, the apple's kosher. I go through your kitchen, you're already there. What's the big deal? Another 15%, you're going to be fine. You're already kosher. So the concept is people are doing all sorts of mitzvahs. They're generous, they give tzedakah, they care about people. That counts too. It's such an artificial definition that we define being a religious Jew as specific things, Shabbos, kosher, tefillin, even though a person might be very lax in honesty in business and in Lashon Hara and all those other things, he's still from. On the other hand, if he doesn't keep Shabbos, by definition he's not from, right? Well, I don't know, just a matter of semantics maybe. But why is the guy who keeps Shabbos and is dishonest in business considered a religious Jew, when the person who's honest in business and doesn't keep Shabbos is called a non-religious Jew? I think the only accurate definition is this person keeps some of the Torah, that person keeps some of the Torah. Neither of them are religious, or both of them are religious, and on some level. Right, so this is kind of what Sinas Chinam is. Kind of look at the other person and understand that there is goodness in them. A few years ago, when they had a massive demonstration, again, when the yeshiva student being drafted into the army, which again, I'm not going to address the merits of that people can argue and differ, and it is a very serious issue. But when the government was first proposed to draft the yeshiva students to the army, so there was a massive demonstration downtown near the bus station. Let's say 500,000 people, 600,000 people, really, really big demonstration, and they were very proud of the fact that it was nonviolent. That's great. But on the other hand, in other words, it seems to be so logical that there'll be violence that it becomes a big cover that it was nonviolent, etc. And they did what they did for a few hours, and whatever, people made their point. But I thought to myself, maybe I'm being cynical and maybe I'm being unfair, that what would have happened if at the end of a 4-hour rally against the government's mandatory draft, let's assume it would have ended with a prayer for the chayolim that are in the army, that they should be safe and that they too are performing a function, a vital function for the Jewish people. Meaning, we take the position, let's say the people there took the position that we need full-time Torah learning, we can't compromise. Let's assume that's your position. But at the same time, you acknowledge what the army is doing. And if 500,000 people would have had that combination, what would have happened? I don't know. But I suspect Mashiach would have come right then and there. Because essentially what we're doing is, you're standing up for the primacy of Torah, but you're also recognizing the value of what the so-called other group is doing. They shouldn't be called other anyway. And that would have been such a wonderful thing, because then the concept would have been, we're on the same team. Klal Yisrael needs all of these different aspects. We need chayalim, and we need policemen, and we need garbage men, and we need people who are learning Torah. And Am Yisrael needs all of them. And without all of them, there's something that's missing, as opposed to simply saying, we count and you don't. Whichever side is looking at it that way. So that would have been Geula, because that would have been, with that massive numbers, that would have been the idea of bringing people together, creating that achdus. And that, again, I don't want to give much, because I certainly have much to improve on myself. So I'm not standing on a podium in any possible way. I'm just reflecting out loud as we approach Tisha B'Av. That building these bridges is so important. And as I say, like Mark Twain, everyone talks about it. We don't necessarily do what it is that we can do. Even in the religious world, Charedim and Dati Liyumi. I mean, it's almost as if they're two different religions. I mean, here you're talking about two populations that are Shomer Shabbos, that are Shomer Kashrus, that learn Torah, that are Orthodox Jews, and they relate to each other, by and large, as if, two different nations, two different religions. How can that be? When Aaron Lichtenstein was nifter, a great gadol in the religious Zionist world, there was not even a sign up in many of the Haredi neighbors. There was not a sign up. It was not. The loss was not even acknowledged. It was not even mentioned, because what? He's not one of us, or whoever the us. Okay, I don't want to be guilty of lashon hara myself, but this is part of the aspect of sinat chinam that exists. It's not just hot sinat chinam, but it's coldness, it's indifference, it's cliquishness. It's the idea that there's an us and there's a them, and us is good and them is not good, and however you draw the line, there's an us and a them. And that's a very, very destructive idea. So this is one thing to think about. Now, there is a Talmud Yerushalmi, a very important Talmud Yerushalmi. The Talmud Yerushalmi says that every generation in which the Beis HaMikdash is not rebuilt is as guilty as the generation in which the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed. Because if we would not continue to be guilty of the same Averos that caused the Churban, there would be a Beis HaMikdash. Now think about this Yerushalmi. This Yerushalmi is actually giving us a very big chiddush. I would not have understood this naturally. I would have understood that the generation of the Churban were guilty of awful sins, so Hashem took away the Beis HaMikdash. We're not guilty of awful sins. We just don't have the special zechus to get the mikdash back. Right? That's what I would have done. We don't have to be guilty of what caused the Korban. We just are not righteous enough to get it back. The Talmud Yerushalmi is negating that interpretation. The Talmud Yerushalmi is actually saying, you don't need special merit to get the Beis HaMikdash back. You don't have to be a super tzaddik. All you need is not to be guilty of the sins that precipitated the Korban. Now, based on that idea, therefore, the Korban Beis HaMikdash is not seen as a past event. It's not that it was destroyed, and our problem is it's not yet built. Rather, it is being destroyed every single day. If Chazal say the Korban Beis HaMikdash is because of Sinas Chinam, that doesn't mean the Sinas Chinam of 1900 years ago. It means it's destroyed on Monday because of the Sinas Chinam of Monday. It remains destroyed on Tuesday because of the Sinas Chinam of Tuesday. It remains destroyed on Wednesday because of the Sinas Chinam of Wednesday. It is as if you're walking by the Har HaBayis and you have a burning Beis HaMikdash in front of your eyes every single day. And even a person with a heart of stone, if you saw the Beis HaMikdash burning, it would affect us in one way or the other. We wouldn't take it casually. And the Yerushalmi is looking at the Korban as a continuous process. So let me share with you an observation of Rav Soloveitchik, very beautiful observation. He points out that we have two paradigms of mourning in our grief. One is private mourning, and one is what you might call public mourning. Private mourning is when, chas v'shalom, someone loses a relative, loses a parent, loses a spouse, loses a child. Right? There's the laws of Avelus. In those laws of Avelus, the trajectory and the direction is always going from the stricter to the more lenient. Shiva is the strictest level of Avelus. You don't leave your house, etc. Then Shloshim, you leave. After 30 days, for most losses, that's the end. For parents, it goes on for a year, but the year is much more lenient than Shloshim. Meaning the direction of private Avelus is to go min hachamor el hakal. Strict, restrictive, to progressively more lenient. When it comes to the period of time during the year when we focus on mourning the Korban Beis HaMikdash, it goes in an opposite direction. You start off with the 3 weeks. So first of all, if you're Sephardi, there's no such thing as the 3 weeks. I mean, you have the fast of the 17th of Tammuz, and really nothing happens until the week of Tisha B'Av. But let's say Ashkenazim, right? I'll be Ashkenazi-centric here. So the 3 weeks, we already start. We don't make weddings. We don't listen to music. Okay. Then you get Rosh Chodesh Av, and then at Rosh Chodesh Av already we don't do laundry, we don't bathe, we don't eat meat or drink wine. And then you have the week of Tisha B'Av. This year there is no week of Tisha B'Av. Tisha B'Av is going to be observed the first day of the week. But the week of Tisha B'Av is actually stricter than even the 9 days. That's why even Sephardim, who don't really start the 9 days, start the restrictions of not washing the Shvuah of Tisha B'Av. And then you have Tisha B'Av. So it's a reversal of the pattern. When it comes to private mourning, it starts off hard and gets easy. And when it comes to public mourning, it starts off easy and it gets hard. What is the logic of the switch in the trajectories? So Rav Soloveitchik said, it is because the psychological and spiritual functioning of mourning is reversed in the two instances. When it comes to private mourning, a person is naturally very devastated. A person loses a close relative. Depending on how close they are, that devastates their life. They feel they cannot go on. So Avelus is a ritual that provides enough of a healing that eventually you will be able to rejoin society. So during Shiva, You don't even go out. People come to you, people feed you, people bring you food. You're just taken care of as if you were a baby. You're not yet ready to rejoin society. Shloshim, you take your first tentative steps in the outside world. Eventually, la'at, like putting your toe in the cold water, and then your foot, and then your leg, and then you finally, make the leap into the cold water. Eventually, you're able to regain your connection to the world. That doesn't mean you forget your grief. A person that cared about someone will carry that grief around all the time. But what happens is, you can compartmentalize it a little bit. It's in your mind, but it's not taking over everything. You can still laugh, you can still, joke, you can work. And there'll be times in which there'll be grief, there'll be sadness. But this was Hashem's bracha. The old saying in English is exactly what Chazal say. Time heals wounds. That's exactly it. Hashem put into the Bria the idea that the passage of time gives us the ability to function. So, the tachlis of private avelos is to take you out of your devastating grief so you can now rejoin society. In fact, Chazal say, Hashem looks askance at people that are so consumed with their grief that they can't go back to normal life. Hashem says, are you more compassionate than I? You have to go back. You have to live. You have to make a life for yourself. You can't give in to despair. That's private mourning. Now, public mourning for the Beis HaMikdash, we have exactly the opposite problem. How many of us are so devastated over the Korban that we can't get out of bed in the morning? How many of us, a new excuse not to go to Minyan, how many of us are so overcome with grief that we can't concentrate, we can't focus, we break out into uncontrollable sobbing? Halavai v'halavai. For most of us, it's exactly the opposite. We don't even know what it is that we're supposed to be mourning anyway. So the purpose, Rav Soloveitchik says, of mourning over the Churban Beit HaMikdash is not to get out of the grief that is all-consuming, but to get into a gradual modality where through externalities you perhaps internalize what it is we don't have. So as a result, we're moving the opposite. We're not here to get you out of your grief. The halachic system is to get you into your grief. So perhaps by external behavior, I can truly mourn. But mourning over the Beis HaMikdash is a very, very difficult process. The generation that experienced the Churban, they experienced the devastation. They knew what they lost. That's why the Gemara says in Bava Basra that the generation of the Churban said, we can no longer eat meat at all. How can we eat meat if there are no korbanos? How can we drink wine if there's no wine libation? Said, we're not going to eat meat, not just during the 9 days, we're not going to eat meat, we're not going to have wine at all. So the Chachamim said, well, wait a second. If you take that logic, then you can't have bread either, because bread was brought as meal offerings. Can live without bread? Their initial response is, okay, we'll live without bread. We'll eat fruit. But fruit was brought as bikurim to the Beis HaMikdash. You're going to stop eating fruit. So they said, okay, we'll live on water and something. Water, there was the water libation of Sukkot. So they realized that at some point the Chachamim said, you got to go on with your life. But that was then. We are like a blind person. How do you communicate color to a person who was born blind? How do you communicate music to a person who was born deaf? We have no idea. So somebody asked the Sfas Emes, Somebody said to the Sfas Emes, what do I do if I can't mourn, I can't cry over the Beis HaMikdash? So the Sfas Emes said, cry over your soul that is incapable of crying over the Churban Beis HaMikdash. How much we're missing, how much we don't understand. There's a famous story, it goes back to the 6-Day War, I'm sure you've heard the story, that when we regained Yerushalayim, the old city, and the Har HaBayit, right, the famous General Matagor, Har HaBayit biyadenu, the Har HaBayit is in our hands. So the first religious boys were there, the Hestra Yeshiva boys were there, with Rav Tzvi Yehuda Cook, Rav Goren, they came there, and the boys were crying and moved that we have the remnant of Hashem's, it's the remnant, it's not of the Beis HaMikdash per se, but the remnant of the wall of the Har HaBayit, the one place where the Shekhinah did not leave. And they were crying and sobbing and praying. And there was a Chiloni soldier, a soldier who was totally not religious, and he was crying as well. And his comrade said to him, what are you crying about? Yeah, they're crying because they believe in God, and they believe in Torah, and then they believe this is a reunification with the divine presence. What are you crying about? He said, I'm crying because I don't know what they're crying about. And that's something that I'm missing. I'm crying because I don't know. But in truth, that's not just the problem of the Chiloni soldier. That's our condition. That's exactly our condition. What is it that we're mourning? They tell a joke, it's a joke, but like many jokes, there's a certain ring of truth to it. That a religious Jew, was retiring after many years in business, and he was planning a trip to Florida. He had been looking forward to it for a long time. The day before the trip, Mashiach came. So he was really quite upset. He said, listen, I believe in Mashiach too, and I believe in the Beis HaMikdash, and I hope for the Beis HaMikdash. But he kept us waiting, 2,000 years, and he has to show up the day before my vacation. Another 2 weeks would have been so bad. And from a superficial level, I hate to even say this, doesn't he have a point? But the truth is that just shows we don't understand. We just don't. I don't understand. We don't understand what it is to be separated from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We don't know. We don't know what it's like to be connected, and therefore we don't realize the pain that the neshama has from that separation, and the pain that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has from that separation. The Gemara in Brachos says that God himself cries. He says, Oy la'av shehegla es banav. Alas to the father that has exiled his children. V'oy la'banim sheheglu mi'al shulchan aviyem. And alas to the children that have been separated from their father. They even say, b'derech drush, it's a drush, that the reason why this month is the month of Av, right? The month of the Churban is Av. Now, of course, these names have Babylonian origin, actually. The Gemara itself says it. But at least in Hebrew, of course, Av is father. So, in a way, it's a bit of a strange name for the month of Churban, the month of estrangement, the month of all of these tragedies, that we should call this the month of Abba, the month of father. But the answer is that's how we have to understand Hashem's feeling towards us. Hashem did what it had to be done because we needed this process for whatever reason. But Hashem is grieving over us as a father grieves over his children. That this is the month of Av, and therefore we have to remember, even in the Churban, the tremendous love that Hashem has. So, in many, many ways, the story of the Chiloni soldier is our story, which again reinforces my earlier point that it's not an us-them type of situation. The us and the them are the same people. We're all in the same type of situation, and the like. So this is some things to think about for Tisha B'Av. Let me share with you yet another thought about this, which is maybe moving in a different direction. The Gemara in Nedarim has a comment on, it says in Yeshayahu, this is the Haftarah we're actually going to read, Tisha B'Av mourning. It's a long Haftarah. And it says, Alma of the Haaretz, why has the land been destroyed? And the answer is, Al Azvam es Torah si, because they have abandoned my Torah. The Gemara in Nedarim explains this was actually a dialogue that the prophets had with God. When the prophets perceived the destruction of Yerushalayim, Eretz Yisrael, the deaths of so many Jews, they didn't understand, Alma of Eretz, why did this happen? And God answered, because they forsake my Torah. Now the Gemara explains that can't just mean they forsake my Torah. The Nevi'im would have known that. So it's mashma, they didn't know something that God had to tell them. So the Gemara's answer was, they kept the Torah, but they didn't recite blessings over the Torah. And that was something that the Nevi'im wouldn't necessarily notice. And therefore the Gemara makes the remarkable statement that the Chorban Beis HaMikdash was because they didn't recite blessings over the Torah. Now, that is problematical on many, many accounts. First of all, according to most opinions, the obligation to recite Birchas HaTorah is only a rabbinic obligation. It's not a Torah obligation. Even like the Ramban, that's a Torah obligation, all right, so it's a mitzvah saseh. It's not one of the major averos. Moreover, why didn't the Nevi'im, Chazal say that, this is talking about the first Beis HaMikdash, not the second Beis HaMikdash, because the second Beis HaMikdash didn't have prophets at the time of the Churban. So the Nevi'im are wondering, why was the first temple destroyed? We know why the first temple was destroyed. Avodah Zarah, Gili Araya Shvichas Damim. And the Nevi'im certainly knew that because that's what they talk about all the time. So why is Hashem bringing in, they didn't say blessings over the Torah? Avodah Zarah, Gili Araya Shvichas Damim. So Rav Eliyahu Lapian says, one of the great Baalei Musar says a remarkable explanation. The Chachamim and the Nevi'im knew exactly why there was a Chorban Beis HaMikdash. Avodah Zarah, Gili Arayas, Shvichas Damim. They knew that. And they were not asking the question, what sins caused the Chorban Beis HaMikdash? That was pashut to them. That was obvious to them. But they were asking what you might call a meta question. A question above the question, and that is, given the facts that the Jewish people were learning Torah, how is it yitochen that the Torah that they learned didn't change them in a better way? It's like saying, let's say somebody's learning in a yeshiva. So they have a good morning seder from 9 to 1. Then they have a 2-hour break until the afternoon learning. So the 2 hours they go to town, they rob a bank, rape a woman, and murder a few people, and then they come back in time for mincha. And their learning is fine. There is something wrong with that picture. Shouldn't Torah make a difference? Shouldn't Torah elevate you? Shouldn't Torah bring you closer to God? Shouldn't Torah inspire you not to do the worst averos? So when they're asking, Alma of the Haaretz, says Rav Eliyahu Lapian, they are not asking what were the sins that caused the Churban, but they were asking a deeper question. How could they have become capable of doing those sins if they were learning Torah? So what's the answer of not making blessings? So here he points out the following. If you remember the beginning of the book of Malachim Aleph, which is describing David HaMelech at the end of his life, and David HaMelech is seized with shivering. He's cold, and he cannot be warmed with no matter how many blankets. I'm not going to discuss the solution, that's problematic. I just want to discuss the phenomenon of David being cold. So the Gemara says, why was David HaMelech not warmed by garments? Because Chazal say, Anyone who treats garments with disrespect is not going to get benefit from them. And when Shaul was pursuing him, at one point, David cut off a piece of Shaul's garment. And apparently garments have relatives like cousins or brothers or whatever it is, and the garments take revenge, so to speak. You treat a garment with disrespect, a garment will not give you benefit. Right? So you don't throw around clothing or whatever it is. So what do you see from here? You see from here that there's kind of a spiritual idea that even a physical entity will not give you benefit if you don't treat it with the proper kavod and respect. There is a concept, it may sound almost a bit pantheistic, although it's not, that you show a respect. In fact, that's a partial basis for a Torah environmental ethic. There's a certain respect we show the earth. Actually, the American Indians, the Native Americans, which are, they're kind of of the Avodah Zarah the way they do it, but they often speak of the environment in that way. There's certain respect. Now, we don't believe the earth is God in any way. We don't believe that. But even the inanimate, you treat with a certain kavod. So if that's true for the inanimate, that's certainly true for the Torah. The Torah will not protect you, will not elevate you, unless you cherish it, unless you respect it, unless you love it. If you treat it like a burden, if you treat it as something you just gotta go through, then even if you're keeping it, it's not going to change you. So when the Gemara says, so according to Rav Elia, what was the question the prophets were asking? They weren't asking, what were the sins that caused the Churban? That was Avodah Zarah, Gilei Raya, Shvichas Damim. But they were asking, why didn't the Torah they learned make them better people? Answer, they did not cherish that Torah, as seen by the fact that they didn't say the blessing over the Torah, thanking Hashem for the Torah. And the same way, therefore, if you're mevazeh et habagadim, you treat clothing with disrespect, it does not give you benefit. If you treat the Torah with that disrespect, it will not give you benefit, and as a result, you can learn from 9 to 1, and rape, pillage, and murder from 1 to 3, and come back for your afternoon shir. Now this is a bit of a frightening thought, because it's really telling us an important lesson. That in order for the mitzvos that we do to elevate us, to purify us, to bring us to a higher madrega, we have to cherish and appreciate those mitzvahs. We can't just go through the motions. We can't just basically say, like some people say, oh, the Torah are 613 problems that I just got to get around so I can do what's really important in my life. We have to have passion, geschmack, commitment, fire, pleasure, love, and then the Torah is appreciated, so to speak. And like the garment that will give you warmth when you treat it with respect and even affection, the Torah will take you where you need to go. Now, here is the interesting rub. So I've talked about two things. I talked about sinat chinam, which is the bayit sheni, and I talked about not making the blessings over the Torah. And both of these are areas which we can rectify. What's interesting is, paradoxically, in some ways they run in opposite directions, which is why it's a complicated navigation. Because when we talk about sinat chinam, the antidote is tolerance, understanding, not pushing things on people. On the other hand, for lo birchu b'Torah b'tchila, the tikkun is passion, enthusiasm, commitment. Now, in some ways, these might run at cross purposes, because normally the more excited and passionate I am about Torah and mitzvahs, the less savlanut I can have for someone that's not following it. And the other way around, if I'm patient and tolerant, I'm okay, you're okay, maybe that's because I'm not passionate enough, I don't care enough. Right? This is the common accusation against Americans, of which I used to be one. I guess I'm still a citizen. Sometimes we say as Israelis, why can't you be like Americans? We're kind and nice, and we don't fight. Why are you always fighting? We don't fight. Well, the answer might be, you don't fight because you care less about everything, right? So you care less, so you don't fight. In other words, is it we have more Avas Yisrael, or is it that we just care less, right? So the problem is, to overcome Sinat Chinam, we almost have to be less passionate. To overcome Lo Bercha B'Torah T'chilu, we got to be more passionate, right? It's very hard to be both ways. It's very hard to be passionate about Torah and mitzvahs, and at the same time, people are what people are. But I think there is a way to break the deadlock, break the contradiction, and that's to understand. Include in your passion Avas Yisrael, which is also a mitzvah in the Torah. V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. Yeah, be passionate about Shabbos and Kashrus and Tefillin and Torah learning, but incorporate in your passion and in your chumras and in your going beyond the letter of the law, which you will do in Kashrus and in everything else. Let's have a mahadrin, min mahadrin, in Avas Yisrael. And that way it becomes part of your passion. Right? They say with Rav Chaim Soloveitchik, the great Rav Chaim Brisker, was very, very makil in pikuach nefesh, meaning if somebody had a cold, he would be machal Shabbos. He basically said if there was any small possibility that something could develop into a serious medical condition, he was legamri makil. And people questioned him. People said, you're makil in Shabbos. He says, I'm not makil in Shabbos. I'm machmir in pikuach nefesh. I'm not being makil. I'm being machmir in pikuach nefesh. So the same thing here. It's not that I'm being makil. If I'm not protesting, and if I deal with people that are chiloni or whatever it is, and I deal with them with kindness, I'm not being makil in halacha. I'm being machmir in the mitzvah of Avas Yisrael. That's a mitzvah to be machmir in too. Chumras are not only in Bein Adam Lamakom. There are chumras in Bein Adam L'Chaveira, which unfortunately we are sometimes very, very makil in. Right? So these are some things to think about. As I say, our prayer and our tefillah should be that if we're not zocheh to the Binyan HaMikdash now, that this should be the last Tisha B'Av. Chazal say Mashiach is born on Tisha B'Av. I think I mentioned it. And the Maral writes that this does not mean Mashiach will physically be born on Tisha B'Av, but this means the bringing of redemption into the world, which is the birth of Mashiach, comes from the tears and the grieving that we have for the Binyan Beis HaMikdash. So, B'ezrat Hashem, may our tefillas, may our kavanos, may our resolutions bring Geula into the world, and we should be zocheh to the Binyan Beis HaMikdash b'mheira v'yameinu.
Yitzchak